My ex, Emily Carter, called me on a quiet Thursday evening after 3 years of complete silence. I almost didn't answer the phone because the number wasn't saved in my contacts. But something about the timing of the call made me pause. It was just after 7 in the evening. The sun was setting behind the Charleston Harbor outside my apartment window. The kind of calm evening where nothing unusual is supposed to happen. "Hello," I said when I answered. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then a voice I hadn't heard in 3 years quietly spoke my name, Daniel. For a second, I forgot how to respond. Emily Carter had once been the center of my life. 3 years earlier, we had been engaged. We had chosen a wedding venue in Savannah. Our families had already met twice. Everything had been moving toward a future that felt completely certain. Then one afternoon, Emily disappeared from my life without warning. No argument, no dramatic confrontation. Just a short message saying she needed time to figure out her life. That was the last real conversation we had. Until now. "How are you?" she asked gently. The question sounded simple, but after 3 years of silence, it felt strangely heavy. "I'm doing well," I replied carefully. She hesitated again, that I could hear faint background noise on her side of the call. Then she said the sentence that explained everything. "I'm getting married next month." For a brief moment, my mind went completely still. Not because the news hurt, but because hearing it so suddenly felt surreal. 3 years of silence. And the first thing she tells me is that she's getting married. That I paused for a second. Then I said the only response that felt appropriate. "Okay." There was another pause. "Congratulations," I added calmly. Then I ended the call. The apartment fell silent again. The harbor lights outside my window flickered as the sun disappeared behind the water. That I placed my phone on the desk and stared at it for several seconds. 3 years earlier, that same phone had been filled with hundreds of messages from Emily. Morning messages, late night conversations. Plans about houses we would buy and cities we might move to. And then suddenly nothing. The strange part wasn't that she was getting married. People move on. Life continues. The strange part was that she had called me at all. Why reach out after 3 years just to deliver that information? That if she simply wanted to inform me, she could have sent a message, or said nothing at all. But a call meant something different. A call meant there was something she wanted to hear from me, or something she expected from me. That I leaned back in my chair and tried to focus on the financial report still open on my laptop screen. But my mind kept drifting back to that voice. Emily Carter had always spoken with a calm confidence that made people listen. When we first met 5 years earlier in Boston, she had just started working for a consulting firm. I was building a logistics company with 2 partners at the time. That we met at a networking event hosted by a mutual friend. Within minutes, she had turned a simple conversation into something that felt unusually natural. That was Emily's talent. She made people feel comfortable quickly. And over the next 2 years, our lives gradually merged together. Weekend trips, holiday dinners, late-night conversations about careers and family. When I proposed to her on a quiet beach in Hilton Head, she said yes before I even finished asking the question. For months afterward, everything felt perfectly aligned, but then subtle changes began appearing. Small things at first, canceled plans, late replies to messages, occasional moments where she seemed distracted even while we were sitting together. When I asked if something was wrong, she always gave the same answer: just work stress. At the time, I believed her, because trusting someone you love often feels easier than questioning them. Then one afternoon, she sent a message that completely changed everything. She said she needed space. She said the wedding should be postponed. And before I could fully understand what was happening, she was gone from my life. She moved out of the apartment we had shared in Boston. She left her job shortly afterward. Within weeks, it felt like she had vanished. Friends who used to see her regularly suddenly didn't know where she had gone. For months, I tried to understand what had happened, but eventually life forced me to move forward. My company expanded. I relocated to Charleston for business. New routines replaced old memories. And over time, the silence became normal. Until tonight. Phone vibrated again on the desk. A new message had arrived. The sender's name wasn't saved, but I already knew who it was. Emily Carter. For several seconds, I just stared at the notification. Then I opened it. The message contained only one sentence. "I didn't expect you to end the call that quickly." I read the message twice, then a third time. Something about the wording felt strange. Not angry, not emotional, almost curious if she had expected a completely different reaction. Before we continue, pause for a moment and think about this question, that if someone who disappeared from your life 3 years ago suddenly called to say they were getting married, what would you do? Would you ask questions? Would you ignore the call completely, or would you respond exactly the way I did? Because at that moment, I wasn't entirely sure whether ending the call had been the right decision, that I placed the phone back on the desk and stood up from my chair. Outside, the harbor was completely dark now. Charleston city lights reflected across the water in long golden lines. 3 years earlier, I had spent weeks trying to understand why Emily left. But tonight, something about that brief phone call made one thought return to my mind. The story of our breakup had never actually made sense. Not completely. And the way she sounded tonight suggested something even stranger. It sounded like she expected me to say something specific. Something she had been waiting to hear for 3 years. My phone vibrated again. Another message from Emily Carter appeared on the screen. This time the message was longer. I opened it slowly. And the moment I read the first line, I realized something about the past that suddenly made everything feel different. The message began with a sentence I never expected to see. Daniel, there's something you were never told about why I disappeared. The message began with a sentence I never expected to see. Daniel, there's something you were never told about why I disappeared. For a moment, I simply stared at the screen. 3 years earlier, I had spent months trying to understand that exact question. Why she left, why she vanished so suddenly, and why she never explained anything clearly. Now, suddenly, she was telling me there was more to the story. My first instinct was not curiosity. It was caution, because people rarely reopen old chapters without a reason. I sat back down at my desk and typed a short reply. What do you mean? 3 small words. The typing indicator appeared almost instantly. Emily was clearly still holding her phone, waiting. Her reply came 30 seconds later. I think we should talk. I looked at the message for several seconds before answering. You already told me you're getting married. Yes, she replied, but there are things you deserve to know before that happens. The sentence made the room feel strangely quiet again. 3 years earlier, Emily had refused to explain anything. Now suddenly she believed I deserved answers. Why now? I asked. The reply took longer this time. Almost 2 full minutes passed. Finally her message appeared. Because I didn't leave you for the reason you think. That sentence landed heavier than the phone call itself. For 3 years, I had believed the same simple explanation. That Emily had changed her mind. That she had fallen out of love. Or that she had chosen someone else. But if that wasn't the reason, then what was it? Explain, I typed. Another pause. Then her response appeared slowly. The year we were engaged, my father lost almost everything. I frowned at the screen. Her father, Robert Carter, had been a successful real estate developer in Boston. At least that's what everyone believed. Emily continued typing. He made several investment decisions that collapsed during the market downturn. That left him with debts he couldn't cover. I felt a quiet tension building in my chest. Emily rarely talked about her father's business in detail back then. I had always assumed everything was stable. But what does that have to do with us? I asked. Her reply came almost immediately. Someone offered to fix the situation. I read that line again, and suddenly something about the story felt darker than I expected. Boo, I asked. This time the pause lasted longer. When the next message arrived, my stomach tightened slightly. The man I'm marrying next month. For a few seconds, I didn't move. The harbor outside my window looked completely still now. So you left me for him, I replied. No, she answered quickly. That's the part you still don't understand. Another message followed immediately. He agreed to clear my father's debts in exchange for marrying me. The sentence felt unreal when I read it. You're saying your marriage is an arrangement? I typed. Her reply came slowly. Yes. The room suddenly felt smaller. 3 years earlier, I had believed Emily simply walked away. But now the story sounded very different. You could have told me, I wrote. No, she replied. You wouldn't have accepted it. She was probably right about that. At the time, I would have tried to stop it, try to fix the problem myself. But apparently Emily had already decided what she believed was the only solution. Before I could type another message, my phone vibrated again. This time it was a call. Emily Carter. I hesitated for a second. Then I answered. Daniel, she said quietly. Her voice sounded more fragile than it had earlier. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. There was a long silence on the line. Then she finally said something that changed the entire conversation. Because he asked me to call you tonight. The sentence confused me immediately. What do you mean? He knows about you, she said softly. And before the wedding happens, he wants to meet you. I leaned back slowly in my chair. That doesn't make any sense. I know, she said, but that's what he asked. Why? I asked again. Another quiet pause. Then Emily answered in a tone that carried a mixture of honesty and exhaustion. Because he wants to know if the man I left behind was actually worth it. The words hung between us for several seconds. Then she added something even more unexpected. And I think he already knows the answer. I didn't respond immediately. Not because I was angry, but because something about the situation suddenly felt clearer than it had in years. 3 years earlier, Emily believed she had chosen responsibility over love. But life has a strange way of revealing whether those sacrifices actually solve the problem. Finally, I spoke. Emily, yes, I'm glad you told me the truth. She didn't say anything, but I could hear her breathing on the other side of the line. Then I continued, but I don't think meeting him would change anything. Another long silence followed. Then she quietly asked the question she probably already knew the answer to. Have you moved on? I looked out across the dark water of the harbor. The reflection of the city lights moved slowly across the surface. Yes, I said calmly. And for the first time since the phone rang earlier that evening, the conversation finally felt complete. Okay, she said softly. I just needed to hear that. Then the call ended. The silence in the apartment returned again. But this time it felt different. Because sometimes closure doesn't arrive when relationships end. Sometimes it arrives years later, in a single unexpected phone call. My personal reflection. Sometimes life doesn't give us closure when relationships end. Sometimes the truth only appears years later, when both people have already moved on. What feels like betrayal in the moment can sometimes be a decision made under pressure we never fully understood. And in the end, the hardest part isn't losing someone. It's realizing that timing and circumstances can quietly change the course of two lives forever.